In this video, we will be showcasing the original Dark Souls game. And Dark Souls holds a special place in my list of favorite video games. It was one of the first games to make me question whether or not I was a real gamer, as I died a lot. And when I say a lot, I mean even Sean Bean had nothing on me. Sometimes regular rank and file enemies would get one good hit in and utterly destroy me, while at other times cocky, overpowered invaders will lag stag me in the back for an insane critical, despite the fact that they were standing in front of me. This is Dark Souls. Let's dive on in. The world of Dark Souls is vast, and I don't mean in the spread out open world style that Bethesda and Ubisoft have been pushing out for years. No, Dark Souls is a different beast entirely. Where a lot of it might seem linear at first, the individual regions connect to one another in a three-dimensional style that makes the game world as large vertically as it is horizontally. And that isn't including dungeons and areas that are a separate instance, such as the Painted World or the DLC Artorias of the Abyss. The world is also very full. Everywhere you go there is stuff, or secrets, or enemies, or traps. It never feels empty or boring. Fast travel is limited and not even available early on in the game. Their fast travel mechanic was reworked and much bigger in the sequels, but in this game it's basic. Point A to point F, and then from there a healthy hike to where you actually wanted to be. And there are no mounts. Everywhere you go on foot. Now we'll talk about boss design. Outside of the Dark Souls series, you will likely not see bosses as unique in design as these ones. Some companies have copied Dark Souls' style of monsters, but they can't pull it off with the same grotesque intrigue as From Software. The bosses vary from somewhat larger than the player to gigantic. There will be many a time when all you can hit with your sword is an ankle. The bosses are also all varied. No boss design is ever used as a boss in the game more than once, though some bosses do become more common through later gameplay as something of a minor challenge, such as the gargoyle area bosses from the bell tower being placed on a path to hinder your progress. In terms of difficulty, bosses are, well, they're typical bosses, but some have incredible movesets that are near impossible to avoid, and massive amounts of damage when one of their hits does connect. Some bosses, like Pinwheel, are extremely weak and easy to take down, while others, like the Moonlight Butterfly here, are mostly out of range for melee players for the majority of the battle, while the boss themselves is able to do one-hit kills with its own ranged attacks. Some bosses, though, can be cheesed for a nearly instant victory, such as the Ceaseless Discharge in the Demon Ruins, and others take no damage at all when they earn certain attack animations. Basically, a boss battle is a whole lot of dodging and trying to time your rolls and hits just right. Otherwise you get creamed and you have to start all over. Such is Dark Souls. And like any good game, boss battles come in multiple flavors. No two bosses will ever fight the same way, and many have phases where attack patterns and behavior change drastically when a certain amount of damage is done or a partner is killed, such as with Ornstein and Smo right here.
Roll away. If he's gonna do the lightning thing, roll. I roll into him. Um, Try not to get killed.
When it comes to the general difficulty of Dark Souls, the tagline, "Prepare to die," was there for a reason. You will die. If you're good, you'll die far less than average players, but you will still die. A typical run-of-the-mill spear-wielding undead can kill you easily if you aren't careful, and as the game progresses you run into common enemies that were basically minor bosses in early game content. Not to mention the negative status effects which can and likely will kill you quickly. Poison is manageable, but toxicity is more complicated, and being cursed is nearly a certain death sentence. Fall damage, though, will likely be the greatest bane to your existence, as narrow paths and sketchy cliffside skirmishes can cause you to lose your footing and plummet surprisingly far to your untimely death. Also, something that should be pointed out is the fact that if you die, you drop all your souls, which is basically in-game currency used for buying items and leveling up, and any humanities that you had. Now, you can retrieve them if you can get back to where you died without dying again. If you die again before you are able to retrieve the things you dropped, they are lost for good. Something I forgot to mention is character customization. In an age of in-depth and detail character customization options to make characters actually look good, Dark Souls is extremely subpar. Spend a little bit of time, like 5-10 minutes on customization, and you'll be left with a character that could pass for a mannequin in a cheap department store. Probably better off just playing as the default character, which looks like a potato, and going from there. Another topic to cover is the graphics. The footage playing throughout this entire video is all from the remastered version of Dark Souls, and while the graphics didn't change a lot, there are some obvious differences. The lighting being a huge one. Surfaces are more reflective and the bloom and ambience are much more immersive. Overall though, the game still shows its age. Glaring seams and low resolution textures abound, and world objects have low polygon counts. None of this is bad though, as I'd say the graphics and effects are on par with some MMOs of the last few years. As for the story and environment, the lore is something else entirely, and detailing it may be a challenge. There are dragons, trees, witches, undead, half chick, half spider hybrids, which are just creepy in their own way, and they are all a part of the lore and tied together through the common narrative. The player character is an undead, one who can become human again through the use of an item called a humanity, and one who strives to gain control of the world. Also, darkness, lots of darkness. The game is full of depth and dead things, grotesque mockeries of life, and weird hybrid mutations of man and animal, or of man and exploding toxic blood sac. You have your pick, really. And while some people will finish the game and never understand the
Yep.
story, the details are often more subtle than most would expect from a game. It's not deep on the scale of Skyrim, but it's not as shallow as many other games. And all in all, I enjoyed the story quite thoroughly.
Busy.
In terms of multiplayer, Dark Souls is what I would consider a drastic difference from other games. For example, PvP. The PvP aspect of Dark Souls is an unbalanced nightmare. You can literally get invaded by one guy, get killed by him, respawn, and then get invaded by the same guy again within minutes. As I wrote this, I was invaded by the same guy 3 times in a row. I personally dislike these constant invasions as they prevent me from enjoying the game, and for me the appeal of Dark Souls is in the story, which is enthralling in its own way. I personally don't hold this PvP element against the game, and it doesn't affect my score or my judgment of how the game is playable. I just personally don't prefer this style of PvP. And I know that PvP in Dark Souls is one of the things that people absolutely love. The people who still do it love it, and that's why they still do it. And none of this is to mean that I don't think a PvP element should exist in Dark Souls. I just feel it should be limited or reworked. Sure, you can disconnect the network to avoid invasions, but then you can't play with a friend via the already super limited cooperative play. The cooperative play in the multiplayer of Dark Souls, as I mentioned a second ago, very limited. You have to place a summon sign down in order to be summoned to the game world of a friend. That friend has to be human when he summons you. Hollowed players cannot summon. You can transfer items to each other by dropping them on the ground for your friend to pick up, which is nice. A lot of co-op games don't support this. Where the co-op is most limited, though, is in persistence. You can only summon your friend in an area where the boss is still alive. Once a friend helps you kill a boss, they are sent out of your game instantly, and you have to solo the next part of the game until you get to a new area where a friend can once again be summoned. Another limitation is the fact that activities completed during a summoned session don't count for the players summoned. So if you and your friend are playing concurrently, he will help you defeat an area boss, then you have to go back to an agreed upon meeting area and get summoned to help your friend kill that same boss. You do get some perks from being summoned though, as death doesn't cause you to lose your earnings, and you get humanities to help keep yourself human throughout the game. It is not a very fleshed out co-op system. It works, but it seems very rudimentary. And at times, getting connection to your friend can be complicated. There were times when my friend and I would both be at the same spot and I'd have to wait 15 to 20 minutes for a summon sign to appear. This is lessened through the remastered version and lessened again by using a matching password that you both put in the game settings, but it can add for a varied amount of tedium in enjoying the game. There was only one DLC made for the first Dark Souls game, Artorias of the Abyss. And it starts with a portal that only becomes accessible after killing a Hydra and a few other monsters. And the portal will eventually drop you back in time in a place called Sanctuary Garden in a land called Ulasile? Ulasile. Let's pretend it's Ulasile. The game world here is not as large as the main game, which is fair, it is a DLC after all, but it adds new monsters, new NPCs, and a nice green forest area full of cliffs and let's just call them caretakers, but they're violent. They take care of the trees and they kill you. You do encounter the namesake boss of this DLC rather soon into the gameplay, as he is not actually the main boss of the DLC. And trust me, you aren't prepared even for this first encounter. This is probably the hardest boss fight in Dark Souls. Artorias is an absolute beast when it comes to speed, damage output, and sheer aggressiveness. His moveset chains spectacularly into a constant damage train, and if you get hit, you can expect to die before you get a chance to heal. Dodging is key here. Dodge often. The DLC also makes changes to certain interactions with other bosses in the main game, changing how they treat you and how they will react to your presence. But I think they still try to kill you, just as bad. In summary, Dark Souls ranks among my top 5 favorite games of all time, and for all the reasons mentioned previously, even the bad ones. Except the Force PvP, that still irks me. It's not a flawless game, but its flaws are minor. The story, graphics, controls, and nearly constant combat lend itself to make this an absolute win of a game. The game itself scores high in my opinion, and let's be honest, my opinion is what these videos are about. So my opinion is this: go play Dark Souls. It's replayable now. It will probably still be replayable in 10 years. From me, Dark Souls gets the score of 10 out of 10 on my scale. Probably the only game that ever will get a perfect replayability skill. And I have to thank you for watching, especially if you made it this far into the video. If you didn't make it this far, well, you won't be around to hear my thanks anyway. For more from me and from this series, please subscribe down below. I also stream on Twitch on Saturdays and at random on other days throughout the week. And let's see, episode 3 is looking like Bioshock.